Hi, welcome back to the ANS Way. We have just in the last week passed our 2-year anniversary of living in Las Vegas, USA. Before we get into the differences between living in the UK versus the USA, we thought we would talk about some of the things that have happened over the last 2 years. The first thing I'm going to speak about are making new friends. It's probably one of the things that everyone is really concerned about when they're moving away from their friends and family, and especially about Vegas.
Even meeting people here.
2 years later, we still meet people that say that they have found it really difficult to make friends here. We've not found it a problem. We have made
We've made some good friends.
Really good friends. I can't even describe it. I think we have been really lucky because the friends that we have made here, I honestly see as friends that we would keep for life. And I don't know if it's something about where we are all at in our lives with how we have all moved to Vegas in the last couple of years, but it's been something that I truly appreciate and I'm very happy about. But what's quite funny is most of our friends have been non-Americans. We have made a few, but it's not quite balanced yet, so we do need to make more American friends, but definitely making friends here in Vegas hasn't been hard.
We've traveled a lot more in the US or to more different states and more different places than we would choose to have traveled from the UK. From the UK, I was kind of set on Florida or going over to the West Coast and visiting the coast of California. We've actually made some journeys in the car, long distance journeys. We've tried out skiing and snowboarding and ghost towns, which Selena keeps taking me to. They're actually really fun and they're all quite different from each other. So that's been a fun experience of living here.
One of the biggest changes for us in the last year was finally buying our first home in the USA. And we're going to talk more about that in the next part where we cover some of the differences.
We've learned US politics and their news are insane.
And lastly, for how I would summarize what's happened over the last 2 years, we've had very little surprises. A lot of people thinking about the move might be really concerned about adjusting to life here. And I wouldn't say that there's much that has caught us out or it has felt that abnormal. Actually, settling here in the USA has been very, very easy. Neither of us have felt homesick. There haven't been any main gotchas with living here. I take that back. Language has been a gotcha. That's a real one. And that's for another video, perhaps. I would say the government agencies dealing with them has been a bit of an adjustment. But otherwise, I wouldn't say there's been any big surprises. If anything, it's been great. It's everything that we had hoped it would be.
Let's get into the differences between living in the UK and the USA. Before we get into them, it's really difficult because how I was brought up and where I was in my life for most of it was fairly poor, and the areas I grew up in are entirely different to the position we're in now. So it's not a fair and apples to apples comparison, but also we're late 30s, which is weird to even say that versus my youth. So we're only doing this from the position that we lived in when we lived in the UK to where we are now. We're in a totally different financial position, mostly because the US pays people fairly. That's the real reason.
Lower taxes on top of that.
Well, yeah, massively lower taxes. So with that in mind, let's get into the differences. Number one, buying a home. The differences are realtors. Realtors are used here in the US for both sellers and buyers. So they kind of act like estate agents, but also brokers. It's very different. We're fairly used to buying homes in the UK, but coming here, we weren't sure. So it says online, use a realtor, so that's what we did. And I guess the function is some element of protection between the buyer and the seller and understanding the legal process and when you're supposed to be doing things. In the UK, we don't have any of that, and we don't suffer any issues, would you say?
No, we're perfectly fine without a realtor. I would say the only real benefit I've personally seen was when we were considering buying in another state. So when we was looking in Florida, it was useful to have somebody that was local there that could do a lot of the groundwork for you. A bit like how we would use an estate agent in that context in the UK. So that's the only way that I see that as a benefit, really.
Yeah. The next part of this is it's fast. If the home is ready to go, so you're not buying a new build, or even when the new build is finished, you can complete on a home in a month. The UK has got to this point where it's just 5-6 months it can take to go through the entire legal process. It's so painfully archaic, which is contrary to some of the points we're going to make later. Paperwork. There's always a lot of paperwork when the US is involved, and it's similar with buying and selling a home here. The only difference is they've got the system right.
When I think about the difference with the paperwork, though, I will say we've got wads of paper like this attributed to buying this one house.
It's quite comical, yeah. There's because it's things like the HOA dues, all of the agreements you have with your mortgage lender, and the fact they can sell your mortgage on. That's another good point. Our mortgage has been sold 3 times. We've only owned this home 8 months.
Yeah.
That's not something that happens in the UK. Your lender is your lender and it sticks with them. There are some subprime lenders where they might sell it on to another company. If you go with a bank, they don't sell it on to somebody else. You're with them for life or for the term of the mortgage.
When we had to go for signing the mortgage, we was there for about an hour, and I don't know how many pieces of paper I physically signed. Now, I have heard in other states some of this can be done electronically, but I'm still imagining that there's tons of paperwork that you have to sign.
Notaries? Something like that.
Something like that. But in the UK, it's nothing like that in comparison. I would say it's a fraction, a few pages in comparison to what felt like hundreds here.
And finally, property taxes. In the UK, we do have, it's not really a property tax, but your ongoing tax you pay to your local authority, your council, which takes care of policing and libraries and fire station and things like that. It's actually quite similar. I think that's how property taxes work here in the US, but you have actual property taxes. That's what they're called. And it's like based on your location and then a percentage of the property or the land value. And they can be quite high. I think we pay around $400 a month. I don't know exactly. But if you go to somewhere like Florida, you might pay $800. You also, if you live out of state and that isn't your primary resident, that can adjust how much they charge you. So instead of paying $400, you might pay $800. Although in the UK we do have council tax, which works in a similar way, we also have stamp duty. Stamp duty is the true property tax, which is a land tax that you pay up front, and it's a percentage up front of the total property price. Now, it varies depending on how much the home costs, so it can vary between 0% and maybe 7 or 8%, depending if your house is a couple of million, where they don't have that in the US. So in a lot of ways, it's a far fairer system.
At number 2, and a bit linked to the last point, is around how much more paper heavy the USA is and the low adoption of technology they have, especially when we in the UK are using the technology.
They are the providers of the technology they avoid.
They developed it, and I was very surprised, especially when it comes to banking as an example, where it's very far behind, especially in Europe in general, where we're very, very digital. We haven't used checks in a very long time. The first thing we experience here is you need to write a check. We didn't even know how to write a check.
Well, we still don't. You've messed up 3 recently.
Yeah, I'm still writing checks. I use it for the cleaner. So for me, that is very surprising about the USA. Added to that is just paper in general. I know some of you will say, no, we're much better now. We do things electronically, but I would say it's electronic, not digital. In the UK, we are far more digital country, and Europe in general, whereas here, you've just taken a piece of paper and made it electronic, and then you still expect me to sign it. That's not being digital.
Number 3, food. There's a big difference in the culture in how people go about eating. I would say here, a lot of people eat out a lot more often than in the UK. Prices used to be great, and you could see why people did that during the pandemic. Prices have got out of control, but I think that's a worldwide thing. Firstly, there's a lot more fast food options, but there's a lot more casual dining options, things like Applebee's and Chili's.
Or just diners that you can go.
Yeah, where you can just casually go with your friends and family and eat there, that we don't have in the UK. We tend to stick to more, not necessarily fine dining, but they are traditional restaurant sit-down meal.
It is very different. If you go out with your family to dinner in the UK, it's much more of a special occasion. It doesn't have to be fine dining, but it is far more of a special occasion, whereas here, families will just go out to eat together, but it doesn't have to be this super special restaurant.
Tipping within the US culture has even started to confuse Americans, because I'm seeing on a lot of the news channels, they're talking about it now, when to tip, when not to tip, how much to tip. Does it change whether you're buying a cup of coffee versus full service? It can get a little bit tedious and time consuming, something that you shouldn't really have to think about, but you're put in these weird pressured moments. As far as I know, at least at the point that we left, you're never going to be standing at a counter ordering a burrito and somebody flips over a screen in front of everybody and says, do you want to give me an extra 20, 22% or 5%. It's such a cultural difference. I'm actually a believer of the tipping system. I think it's just got a bit out of control here in the US.
Another factor when it comes to food are the grocery stores, or supermarkets as we like to call it. They are very different. Learning the different types of supermarkets that they have here, the quality of food is very different. I definitely miss Sainsbury's, Marks and Spencer's and Waitrose back at home. But the other factor here is the language. I didn't really appreciate that until I was here, but food items are called different things. So if you want rocket, coriander, spring onions, you have to remember arugula, cilantro.
Green onion?
Green onions. So you have to be mindful of that. So if you're asking somebody in the shop to help you to find something, you have to know what to call it. Even things like a trolley, they call it a shopping cart. And then what did I find out later? Toilet paper is bathroom tissue or something.
Yeah, which kind of makes sense when you think about the language they use.
It is, it's very literal, but these are the things that you have to be mindful of because you will just get a very blank face when you're asking for a spring onion.
Number 4, and probably one that affects everybody and everybody has an opinion on, is healthcare. Where do we begin? We've done a few videos on this and it's a very contentious subject. It's different, is what I would say. And it really depends, kind of like what I said at the start of this, where you are in life. So where you are geographically in the country, the US, and also where you are financially. If you have a good job with good insurance, you're probably not going to be paying that much more than your national insurance contributions to the UK, which covers things like healthcare, the NHS system. So in terms of costs, it's not necessarily that different. It gets a little bit more complex as you begin to use the system because it's going to depend on all kinds of different things like deductibles and stuff we've talked about in other videos. So for me, it's not a cost issue with the position that we're in. It's more a complexity issue. In the NHS, in the UK, I never had to think about anything. You just phone your doctor, they give you a referral, you go to the hospital, you get dealt with. Here,
In a very long time, though.
it's very long, but we're not going to get into this. It is very long. Here, yes, you can phone your doctor and you'll get in immediately. You can go to the hospital immediately, but you're never sure whether you're meant to pay then or whether 3 months later you're going to receive a bill that you're not sure you're meant to pay. So there is a massive difference between how we operate both systems and how we operate within those systems.
I would say our system is far easier. There's less issues of things.
When we say our, who are we referring to now? What do we consider ourselves?
NHS.
We consider ourselves the NHS.
I still do. I consider that our system that we had for most of our life, and that's far easier. Here, I've had myself booked in for the wrong type of appointment. I've had a doctor prescribe me something that they shouldn't have, and somebody else pointed that out afterwards. None of that has ever happened to me in the NHS. Those of you who have been concerned, we get a lot of messages asking about healthcare and the concerns over the fact that you've got children to consider, that you have some form of ailment or ongoing issue. If you are in a good position here, like Ant said, with a job, I don't think there's any reason not to consider moving here because of that. I think with a good healthcare plan, you can plan for these things, you can put money aside. Also, there are other ways to save money for healthcare. There's FSAs, there's HSAs that I've covered in another video. So there are ways to navigate the system. It's just learning how to.
And I think that is it. The summary is you need to learn how best to manage your healthcare in the US, whereas you don't have to consider these things in the UK.
At number 5, we have cultural differences. One of the standout things that I can think about in the USA is how sports mad they are. I have not had an interaction at work with clients and with people that we just meet out in general where sports is not discussed in some form, or where they're not, very quickly they're trying to establish what sports you're into, what's your team. And the moment we say, actually, we don't follow anything, it really does shut down.
Formula One.
We follow Formula One, which is not very well known here, although slowly becoming more popular, but it does shut down the conversation very quickly. And I have had this interaction with somebody, and when I said I wasn't into sports, he didn't know what to say. That was it. They was like, okay, and then just walked off. I personally would like to learn more about sports here. So we have tried we've gone to a football game here. I would like to watch the NBA, hockey, because I think it does help with integrating. And I would like to understand when they're talking about the Super Bowl and this team playing that team. And it just makes life, I feel as though it would make our lives a lot easier if we got into it.
The other thing I would say is they seem more family orientated. And I don't know whether that's, I grew up in London and maybe it's a little bit different to if we grew up in the north maybe, but it seems like a more family orientated place in the way they build their parks and their open spaces, in the way they build their homes, the way people will invite you into their family and want you to come over and spend time, the way they structure their tax system. The whole thing with the US feels like it's made for families. And I know it's going to be surprising for a lot of people, but it feels more inclusive and it feels more like it's trying to help out middle class family unit to me here.
I don't know if this is just what it's like in the south of England or London, as Ant said, but in the short time we've been here, we have found far more people inviting us into their home, come stay with them, than what would be normal in the UK. In the UK, that would only be, I don't know how to describe that. It wouldn't be the norm for your friends to do that in the UK.
Do you think that could be just the house side?
Could be. Maybe we just can't fit people in, whereas people here do have space to accommodate.
Number 6, holidays or vacations. When we lived in the UK, there's this rhetoric that Americans don't have holiday in terms of if they're working people, they're not assigned any holiday or very few days to go on holiday, and they don't really get away that much. That couldn't be further from the truth. Having come here, and again, this might just be with the people that we're interacting with, they take way more vacation than the people that I knew in the UK. And this might be down to the financial status, your financial position. They're always away. They might not be constantly traveling across the world, but I think because their country's so large and so diverse, they're always away for a couple of days or a week here. They tend to go to Mexico quite a lot and they travel across the US a lot. People in the UK don't do that, as far as I know. My friends didn't.
100%, I've noticed all my US colleagues are constantly having breaks. And I would say they do more short breaks than what we do. We might do a minimum of a week, 2 weeks, sometimes even 3 weeks. I know some of my colleagues, my UK colleagues back home. But here, they're always away doing something. Skiing, going to the beach, renting an RV, going camping. And this idea that they don't have enough holiday or vacation days certainly isn't what I've noticed. And whether that's unpaid leave or they get enough paid leave, they are definitely going away far more than what I've ever noticed of my friends and family back home. At number 7, we have politics and news. And we mentioned it at the beginning about how insane that is here. I cannot describe how different the politics and the use of news and media are different here to the UK. There is definitely a direct link here between the news channels and their political stance, whereas in the UK, if you're watching something on the BBC, it's not so obvious about whether they're left or right, whereas here, it's in direct correlation with whatever agenda, and it is, to me, one of the same. And that's a huge difference with the UK, and to the point where I hate having the news on here. I pretty much will always avoid it unless there's something really interesting that has piqued my interest. I don't enjoy having the news on in the background, and I have colleagues that say the same thing. They won't engage. Actually, they find it. I remember speaking to a colleague and she was telling me how when she was watching it, it actually made her feel very anxious and depressed. So her stance on that was just avoid at all costs, because it's just very, very depressing watching the news here.
Yeah, I would say it is very depressing. It's very much doom, gloom, negativity, fear, all of that. But I find it so divisive. I think it's not just the political, because our news does have a political lean, less so than here, but it's nowhere near as divisive. It's as if it's all set up to make people, just normal people, hate each other over ridiculous things that aren't necessarily applicable to people's lives. It's so similarly, I don't watch it. I watch some of the local news that comes up on YouTube just because often you'll see fun stuff. Number 8 is transportation. In the US, unless you live in a very urban area, you're going to need a car. Being an American citizen and having a car is one of the same, essentially. You have to have a car here. It's very different to the UK and actually a lot of Europe. But the UK, you can live live your life, and I have friends never owning a driving license. You don't necessarily need one. It's very easy to get around on public transport. We have great, what do they call it here, subway? We call it the Tube. Yeah, the Tube. We have great links to all of the UK, or most of the UK, using trains, using planes, using all kinds of other methods like coaches and ride shares. Here you don't really have that. You have your car or nothing. And if you want to travel by plane, it is obscenely expensive. In the UK, you can get a ticket for 20, 30, 40 pounds. Plane ticket here to your next state might be anywhere from $100 to $400, so you better have a car.
One of the things I do miss about the UK, and it's not just the fact that you need a car, it's the lack of things that you can even walk to, the options, especially here in Vegas. I know that's not everywhere in the US, and we've been to places in California that we see that if you live in the right spot, you can walk to some shops. Apparently, on that point, they are building a place called Urban Core. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in another video, that is not going to be too far from here, where the whole aim of that area is shops, restaurants that you can walk to. So we are very much looking forward to that, although I think that's a good few years away. At number 9, we have the standard of living here in the USA. I think without doubt, both of us would say what we have noticed of like-for-like families of this, what is supposed to be, what would you call that, the middle?
Yeah, the middle classes. 2 working people, parents and a kid or 2.
If we talk about that category, they are generally living a much better life, in our opinion, here in the USA to the UK. And what we mean by that is the amount of expendable cash that they have, the number of vacations that they take, the type of house that they're living in, the things that they can do, the activities they can do. Just overall, it was one of the first things that I noticed when we moved into the rental, was just looking at those families and how they lived with their children was not like what we were used to seeing it back in the UK.
It's a marked difference. Maybe to give an example, if you had maybe somebody working in healthcare, whether you're a nurse or whether you're a technician, and maybe somebody working in a call center, let's say, the level of extra living, as we would see it in the UK, is astronomical compared to us. An American family seems to, on the surface at least, have so much more money available to them, which means they can do so much more. The UK focus is kind of just staying afloat. It seems those people are really struggling with good jobs. You'll have 2 people with good jobs really struggling to meet their commitments, paying their bills and looking after their children and doing extracurricular stuff. And you often have to balance what extracurricular stuff your children can do in the UK, whereas that doesn't seem to apply to the people that we know and we've been around. Number 10, what is the feeling? It's the intangible differences between the UK and the USA. And this is my personal opinion. I'm sure many people are going to disagree with it. It feels like the UK operates a parent and child method. So the UK and the UK government act as the parent, who are always attempting to guide, narrate, help, assist,
structure,
meddle in your lives, versus the US, which kind of has a, once you're an adult, deemed as an adult, you are responsible for yourself. And you can see that in lots of little things. So as we mentioned with the medical system here, it's kind of, you work it out. There's no safety thing built in, and even if there is, you need to work out which one applies to you. The UK, you just phone up a doctor, say, hey, register me.
Always taken care of,
always.
Irrespective of your kind of means, your situation, you're always going to be looked after.
The taxes, we watch a channel, Caleb Hammer, I think it is, and it's not, I was going to say it's surprising, it isn't surprising. Because of the way the tax system works here, where you are required to file your taxes, you tell the government. So many people don't pay tax here. We watch this channel and there's people like, oh yeah.
I didn't know. Yeah. They're so ignorant.
Ignorant to the fact that they're supposed to file their taxes, or how much, or some of them will have 20 grand's worth of federal tax debt, and like, oh yeah, I put away 2,000 a year. But you know that's not enough. It's not weird, it's just you're responsible yourself, whereas in the UK that cannot happen. Unless you own your own business or you're self-employed, they take care of your taxes. It's kind of something you don't have to worry about. And for me, it's this fundamental difference between personal responsibility in the US, whether you like it or not, whether it's good for you or not, you are going to be responsible for working your life out, and you'll be punished if you don't. Whereas in the UK, you're not really that responsible. You could kind of just exist.
Yeah. Fine.
Yeah.
With that, I do believe there's positive and negatives to both. We've said this in a lot of videos. I would never put the UK system down in terms of what it offers when you're starting off in life, and especially if you come from a family where you have limited means. The system is really there to give you an opportunity to be able to do better, be educated, to make sure you are healthy. And that's what's great about the UK to a point. And then you're almost stunted, I would say, in the UK. Whereas here in the USA, you are very accountable. You have to be responsible. You have to find a way. You have to make your own opportunity. So it is a lot harder, but with that comes greater opportunity, because when you can figure that out, whether it's you've come from another location to the USA or you were born and raised here and you find that way, you end up doing so much better for a like-for-like situation than in the UK. So there are pros and cons to both. It just depends on how you choose to navigate.
Taking into account all of the differences and quirks of each place, would we settle in the US? For me, I'm settled here at the moment. I can't really see myself anywhere else at the moment, but the reason for that is I've only existed in the UK and the US, and the US works for our situation. I'm very settled in Vegas. That doesn't mean to say I don't want to try other places. I really do want to maybe spend a year, 2 more here, and then even if we keep this house and rent it out, and then travel around the US and live in different places, and maybe I'll get used to the rain. I would love to live in different countries and experience those before I decide to settle here. If you took away the option of moving to other countries and living, where would I choose to live? It would be the US.
I would say the same. After 2 years of being here in the USA, I have 0 regrets about the move. Actually, my mum was asking me this recently. I don't miss the UK. I miss family and friends, but for the most part, I love being here. Like I said at the beginning, we've made some great friends. The way that we're living, it really suits our lifestyle. Like Anne, I would like to try other places in the USA because we've only tried Vegas for now, so at one point we will do it. For me, I'm less about other countries. I think I could happily see myself staying in the USA forever. Well, there you have it. After 2 years of living, we've talked through what has happened and some of the main things that we have learned over the last 2 years. For those of you that have moved here, we would love to know, please comment below what your experiences have. Do you agree? Is there anything different that you've experienced?
And if you don't agree, you're wrong. You're doing it wrong.
And for those of you that are perhaps considering or just watch the channel in general, let us know if there's anything else that you want to know. We've been here 2 years now. Are there any other things that you want to know from our perspective about living in the USA? If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that like button. Thanks for watching.